Thank you, President Officer. I was reflecting earlier today before I decided to speak in this debate very briefly about when I first became aware of the Commonwealth, and I suspect because of my interest in athletics as a youngster, it was through first experiencing or watching the Commonwealth Games or hearing about them. I also had the pleasure, although I remember very little about it, actually to live in Jamaica for some of my early years, and the Queen visited Jamaica during the period. I was there in 1953, President Officer. I know members will find it hard to believe that I could have been there in 1953. I don't actually remember anything about the Queen's visit, but I do remember vividly being shown photographs of that in a family album in the years when I could appreciate these things and being told that the Queen was there as head of state and of the Commonwealth. And then I also remember from my school days that legacy map of the world which hung on the wall, with huge areas of pink on it, which was then the British Empire, which I'm glad to say came to an end in the way that Ted Brocklebank described, and that far better form of relationship between many nations of the world developed through the Commonwealth, and for the reasons that Ted Brocklebank said. Now, that general awareness of the Commonwealth turned for me into being fully awakened when I had the very great privilege just 3 or 4 years ago in Edinburgh to chair the Commonwealth Conference of Education Ministers. And it was at that time that it really became apparent to me, when all those delegates were there, other education ministers from other nations, sharing common cause, that the sheer scale of the Commonwealth became quite so apparent to me, both in terms of the geographic area of the world that it does extend to, but also of the hundreds of millions of people who make up the Commonwealth population. But also the diversity from north to south, from east to west, and reflecting within that all the diverse cultures that we know do exist within the Commonwealth, but also the different challenges. And one moment in particular in that conference will stick with me forever, where we were discussing a very difficult issue about how countries were poaching each other's teachers effectively, particularly in the African continent, and the damage that was doing, but also as part of that, the rate of attrition that AIDS was taking of the teaching population, and that was truly horrific. But also, in that context, also the access that young people had to education, and there are still millions of young people in the African subcontinent who do not yet have access to the basic education that we have. Now, during that debate, I was getting my pager buzzing me, telling me from my private secretary I was running now an hour late for a meeting in St Andrew's House, and I had to get there quick. I couldn't leave the Commonwealth meeting for obvious reasons until it was concluded. When I got to the meeting in St Andrew's House to discuss this ministerial responsibility I had, it was to decide whether to put 2 megabits or 8 megabits of broadband connection into every single school in Scotland. And it struck me the complete contrast between the debate I'd come from, which was discussing the absolute fundamentals of providing basic education to millions of people, with the further sophistication we were trying to make on an already sophisticated education system. But despite those differences and those contrasts, there were still common bonds between the countries, and a desire to learn from each other, to share experience, and to allow us to help develop those who need to develop, but for us also to learn lessons of some of the things that we've forgotten within our learning system in that context. And I also was made very much aware by discussions at that week in Edinburgh of the great similarities between Commonwealth countries in the way in which we govern and in the administrative systems that we have. And that is something that we share in common as well. Moving on from that, President Officer, I have had the pleasure to be welcomed in a number of Commonwealth countries when I visited Australia, New Zealand and Canada, Singapore, all of that following the Education Ministers' Conference and building on contacts that we've made. And last summer I was in British Columbia, and through the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association made a personal visit to the Parliament there and met, as it happened, people in education in that context as well. And I think that's one of the strengths of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, that almost at the drop of a hat you can make connections in countries all over the world to our mutual benefit, and I commend what they do. After 60 years, the Commonwealth is still relevant, and it should remain relevant. It is a force for good. There's much more that is to be done over the coming years, and I wish it extremely well in that task.